Good evening. Welcome to the Elyria City Council meeting for Monday, December 2nd, 2024. At this time, we'll do a moment of reflective silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Ms. Davis, would you please lead us in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Ms. Davis. For those in the audience, if I could ask you to turn your phones to the off mode or silent during the council meeting, it'd be greatly appreciated. Mr. Clerk, can I have roll call, please?
Sir, Mr. Callahan.
Here.
Mr. Sierra.
Here.
Mr. Armstrong.
Here.
Mr. Oswald.
Here.
Mrs. Mitchell.
Here.
Mr. Tolet.
Here.
Mr. Lippian.
Here.
Mrs. Sawerka.
Here.
Mrs. Davis.
Here.
Mr. Schneider.
Here.
Mr. Stewart.
Here.
All present.
Public hearings.
There are none.
Can I get approval of the minutes?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Sierra,
Second.
second by Ms. Mitchell. Is there any further discussion?
Question.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carried. Remarks and reports from city officials. Mayor Brubaker.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for this evening. Just a quick update. I was down in Columbus this afternoon talking to Senator Manning, as well as the Ohio Mayor's Alliance in regards to House Bill 296. Just to refresh your memory, that is the bill that's on the docket right now that already came out of subcommittee. It's anticipated to be voted on by the House yet this year in lame duck session in regards to the police pension increase, basically taking us from about 19.5% to matching fire at 24%. That has passed the subcommittee. We do anticipate, like I said, it going to full House yet this year. We were fighting against it, passing this in lame duck session without having additional conversations. If it passes the House, it'll eventually go to the Senate. I had a very good meeting with Senator Manning in regards to this. He didn't tell me which way he was leaning or not, but I have a suspicion of where he is, and that looks good. I don't know that it will be passed or voted on by the Senate this year. But the Ohio Mayor's Alliance and my view when I spoke at the press conference was, we know this is coming. It's going to happen. But when they talk about parity of the two pensions, where police is at, I think, 19.5 versus 24 for fire, they want to bring it together. That will dramatically impact us. And you've heard, I think, Mr. Pileski talk about this for a couple years now when it was first introduced. But one thing that I shared with Senator Manning is it's really not parity, because there are more police that are paying into the pension than there are fire. So when you look at that percentage, it's actually going to be paying more into it. So I talked specifically about as a city council and finance director in regards to how we've spent our ARPA money and the fact that starting in 2025, we got about $5 million for those 45 police and fire, plus I calculated with Mr. Farrell and Mr. Pileski's help of another $3 million potentially. That would have to added for the additional pension. So we were able to speak out about it. I'm not confident that it will pass completely this year, but they also talked about the House made some changes to it versus taking it from 19.5 directly to 24%, where they may step it over the next 6 years, which was also what the Ohio Mayor's Alliance was looking for them to do as well. So I thought it was a productive day down there. Remains to be seen what happens in the next 4 sessions that they have through the end of the year. And I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Any questions for the mayor? Ms. Sawerka and then Mr. Tolet.
Thank you, through you. No changes to OPER's pension?
Through you, Mr. President, no. That was one of the questions brought up to our leader in the OMA by one of the news media, and there is no changes forthcoming in OPERS.
Thank you.
Mr. Tolet.
Through you, if it passes at 24.5%, we're looking, I believe the number was 1.5 million annually. Is that fairly accurate?
Through you, Mr. President, I believe that sounds about right, yes.
Thank you.
And that would be going from 19.5 to 24.0.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for the mayor? Thank you, Mayor. Safety Service Director, Mr. Pianowski.
I don't have any report this evening, but I'm here for any questions you might have.
Any questions for the director? No? Finance Director Plesky.
No report, Mr. President.
Law Director Deary.
I have no report this evening, Mr. President.
Leader Police Department, Chief Pelko.
Good evening. I just wanted to give an update for the status of the NIU. We're up to 38 arrests for that unit since October. Again, 2 firearms have been recovered and numerous drugs. Also, I wanted to recognize Officer Bargenhauser of our police department. He on Friday is going to get awarded the CIT Crisis Intervention Officer of the Year by NAMI. So congratulations to him on that award and for his outstanding work. But I'll entertain any questions.
Very good. Congratulations to him. Any questions for the chief? Ms. Sawerka.
Thank you, through you. What was his name again, Chief?
Bargenhauser, Brandon Bargenhauser.
Through the chair, this is the second time we've had somebody that was the Officer of the Year, isn't it?
I want to say it's our third. We had Officer Jama, I think Officer Varga, fourth, Lieutenant Poole, and then he'll be the fourth one.
That's fantastic, thank you.
Very good. Any other questions for the chief? Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Leader Fire Department, Chief Pernesti.
Good evening. I just want to give you a couple quick updates. We had a couple serious fires we were involved in. The first one was on Tuesday or Wednesday. It was in Elyria Township, but our firefighters were there first before Elyria Township they were on another call. But it was a very serious fire with a female that unfortunately ended up passing. But when our members got to her, they had to overcome many obstacles. Inside, the house was very cluttered, and they did an absolutely fantastic job of getting in there with the clutter and getting her out. And when we transported her, she was still alive. Unfortunately, she succumbed a couple days later. We also had a fire this weekend on the north side, and we received it was on Timber Lane. We received a very nice letter from a thank you from the family. So I'm pretty proud of my guys for they went the extra mile and took care of some of the valuables. Also, it's been a while since I updated council or administration. One thing that I'm very proud of is I put in front of you is the minimum staffing. I know those are 2 words that sometimes bring a chill to council and past administrations and past councils, but it's down. It's down by a lot. And I wanted to thank the administration for keeping the staffing, making it a priority to keep us staffed, because as you have staffing, you don't have the minimum staffing overtime. And that's the key. So I just wanted to update you, and you can see how much it's gone down, and it's one thing that I worked very hard of when I was put in this position. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. And again, thank the administration. We do have the SAFER grant that we received money for in February, which will add 3 more members to the department. We will be going with laterals starting in, I think, 10 days. So we will be advertising heavily for laterals, and that increase will just give us another boost and hopefully drop that. But, the letter that was done before with the prior, when the mayor was the safety director, under the prior administration, it really hasn't had an effect when we went to that. So, and I don't foresee any other problems with the minimum staffing. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Any questions for the chief?
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Mr. Farkas, Chief Building Official.
Thank you, Mr. President, through you. A quick round of demolition updates. We had a front porch near collapse at 310 13th Street. That one's been on our radar. We had that front porch removed. We had a similar front porch incident brought to our attention by Mr. Armstrong at 804 West Avenue. That porch was removed as well as the rear deck. We had a garage fire many years ago at 1200 Lowell Street that unfortunately cost someone their life. That structure was recently removed. 412 Bell, Mrs. Davis, that structure has also been removed. And currently, we are pursuing 994 Golf, which is on the Hill. That should take effect end of this week, beginning of next. That is it. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Farkas? Ms. Davis?
Through you, Chair. I just want to say thank you, that problem is taken care of at 412 Bell. Like I said before, we have a lot of kids in that neighborhood, and people don't raise kids like they used to, so they're just all over the place. I was truly, truly worried that someone was going to get hurt over there. But thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Farkas? Thank you, Mr. Farkas. Mr. Stewart, Superintendent Wastewater. Questions? No? Very good. Community Development, Ms. Scott. Okay, no questions there. Engineering, Mr. Schneider. Questions for Mr. Schneider? All right, very good. I think that's everybody. Mr. Tolet?
You don't have to go, I'm sorry, you can stay there. Kathy reached out to all of us, and that meant a lot, that she was proactive, not reactive, and I wanted you to be aware of that. I was hoping she was here, so thank you. That's important. Thank you.
Okay, very good. President's referrals and remonstrances. Item number 1, Finance. Item number 2, Finance. Item number 3, Finance. Item number 4, Finance. Item number 5, Finance. Petitions and remonstrances from the lobby.
There are none.
Petitions and remonstrances from council members.
There are none.
Reports of standing and special committees.
We have one. We have considered the matter of appointment of Chad Schneider for the Community Development Committee Chair.
Mr. Sarah.
Through you, Mr. President, Through you, Mr. President, I make a motion to approve this.
Second.
Second by Mr. Callahan. Is there any further discussion?
Question?
Questions be called. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried.
Committee Report 2024-8. That's all the committee reports.
Resolutions, first reading.
Sponsored by Finance. A resolution approving the list of properties for the collection of emergency temporary repair costs and directing the clerk of council to certify said costs to the Lorraine County Auditor.
Mr. Tolet.
Mr. President, I ask that this resolution be passed in its first reading under suspension of rules.
Second.
Second by Ms. Davis. Is there any further discussion?
Question.
On the suspension, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. On the passage, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried.
Resolution 2024-43. Sponsored by Finance. A resolution finding that the city has unfit for municipal use certain city property.
Mr. Tolet.
Mr. President, I ask that this resolution be passed in its first reading under suspension of rules.
Second.
Second by Mr. Schneider. Is there any further discussion?
Question.
On the suspension, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. On the passage, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried.
Resolution 2024-44. That's all resolutions first reading.
Resolutions second reading.
There are none.
Resolutions third reading.
There are none.
Ordinances first reading.
Sponsored by Finance, an ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director of the City of Elyria to dispose of city property that is unfit for municipal use.
Mr. Tolet.
Mr. President, I ask that this ordinance be passed in its first reading under suspension of rules.
Second.
Second by Ms. Davis. Is there any further discussion?
Question.
On the suspension, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. On the passage, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carried.
Ordinance 2024-175. Sponsored by Community Development, an ordinance amending Section 1131.02 Codified Ordinances of the City of Elyria, Ohio, known as the zoning ordinance, to rezone certain real property located at Brunswick Drive and West Ridge Road, Elyria, from B-N Business Neighborhood District to R-MD Residential Medium Density District, and declared an emergency.
I declare this public hearing has been held. Our first reading has been held. Public hearing to be determined.
Sponsored by Community Development, an ordinance granting a conditional use permit pursuant to Chapter 1135 of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Elyria, Ohio, to Ridgewater LTD for a cluster home development at real property located at Brunswick Drive and West Ridge Road, Elyria, Ohio.
I declare this ordinance has had its first reading. Public hearing to be determined.
Sponsored by Community Development, an ordinance adopting the Community Housing Impact and Preservation Program, CHIP, policy and procedures, manual updates, and authorizing the submission of same to Ohio Department of Development, Office of Community Enhancements.
Mr. Tolet? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Callahan, my apologies.
Mr. President, I move that this ordinance be passed on its first reading under suspension of rules.
Second.
Second by Ms. Mitchell. Is there any further discussion?
Question.
On the suspension, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. On the passage, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carried.
Ordinance 2024-176. Sponsored by Community Development and Finance. An ordinance approving the Plan Year 2025 Community Development Block Grant Action Plan, the 2025 to 2029 Consolidation Plan, analysis of impediments to fair housing choice and slum and blight recertification, and authorizing the mayor to submit the Plan Year 2025 Action Plan to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development.
Mr. Callahan?
Mr. President, I move that this ordinance be passed on its first reading under suspension of rules.
Second.
Second by Mr. Tolet. Is there any further discussion?
Question.
On the suspension, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. On the passage, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried.
Ordinance 2024-177. Sponsored by Community Development and Finance. An ordinance amending Ordinance 2022-169, approving an extension and reimbursement increase for the Downtown Historic Redevelopment Grant Program for improvements at 124 Middle Avenue, Elyria, Ohio.
Mr. Callahan?
Mr. President, I move that this ordinance be passed on its first reading under suspension of rules.
Second.
Second by Mr. Tolet. Is there any further discussion?
Question.
On the suspension, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. On the passage, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carried.
Ordinance 2024-178. Sponsored by Finance. An ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into a professional services agreement with Macaulay and Company LLC for grant consulting and writing, government and public relations, and resource development services.
Mr. Tolet.
Mr. President, I ask that this ordinance be passed in its first reading under suspension of rules.
Second.
Second by Mr. Snyder. Is there any further discussion?
Question.
On the suspension, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. On the passage, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried.
Ordinance 2024-179. Sponsored by Finance. An ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into a second amended water supply agreement with rural Lorraine County Water Authority for services in Chestnut Commons area and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Tolet.
Mr. President, I ask that this ordinance be passed in its first reading under suspension of rules and declared an emergency.
Second.
Second by Ms. Davis. Is there any further discussion?
Question.
Question's been called. On the suspension, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. On the emergency, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. On the passage, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried.
Ordinance 2024-180. I'm out of order here, just a sec. Okay. Yeah, okay. Just want to make sure. Sponsored by Utilities and Finance. An ordinance authorizing the mayor to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for chemicals for the water pumping plant for years 2025 and 2026 and declare an emergency.
Ms. Mitchell.
Mr. President, I ask that this ordinance be passed on its first reading under suspension of rules and declared an emergency.
Second.
Second by Ms. Davis. Is there any further discussion?
Question.
On the suspension, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. On the emergency, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. On the passage, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carried.
Ordinance 2024-181. Sponsored by Utilities and Finance. An ordinance authorizing the mayor to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for chemicals for the wastewater pollution control plant for chemicals for years 2025 and 2026 and declare an emergency.
Ms. Mitchell.
Mr. President, I ask that this ordinance be passed on its first reading under suspension of rules and declared an emergency.
Second.
Second by Mr. Armstrong. Is there any further discussion?
Question.
On the suspension, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. On the emergency, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. On the passage, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carried.
Ordinance 2024-182. Sponsored by Finance. An ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into an amendment number 1 to the professional services agreement with Black & Veatch Management Consulting LLC and declare an emergency.
Mr. Tolet.
Mr. President, I ask that this ordinance be passed in its first reading under suspension of rules and declared an emergency.
Second.
Second by Mr. Schneider. Is there any further discussion?
Question.
On the suspension, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. On the emergency, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. On the passage, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried.
Ordinance 2024-183. Sponsored by Utilities and Finance. An ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into an agreement with ODOT for an urban paving project of State Route 301, Abbey Road, and Cleveland Street to Chestnut Ridge Road.
Ms. Mitchell.
Mr. President, I ask that this ordinance be passed on its first reading under suspension of rules.
Second.
Second by Mr. Tolet. Is there any further discussion?
Question.
Questions been called. On the suspension, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. On the passage, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carried.
Ordinance 2024-184. sponsored by Utilities and Finance. An ordinance authorizing the mayor to apply for and accept, if offered, the pedestrian and bicycle special solicitation grant through the ODOT, Ohio Department of Transportation.
Ms. Mitchell?
Mr. President, I ask that this ordinance be passed on its first reading under suspension of rules.
Second.
Second by Ms. Davis. Is there any further discussion?
Question.
On the suspension, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. On the passage, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carried.
Ordinance 2024-185. Sponsored by Finance. An ordinance providing for the issuance and sale of bonds in the maximum principal amount of $1 million for the purpose of paying costs of acquiring a roadway for public access and its site located at the southeast corner of Route 57 and Chestnut Ridge Road in the city.
Through you, Mr. President, this necessitates a roll call vote.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Tolet?
Aye.
No, wait a minute. Make the
Excuse
motion.
me.
Got to make the motion.
I'm sorry.
My
And then,
apologies. Yes.
Mr. Tolet?
I apologize. Mr. President, I ask that this ordinance be passed in its first reading under suspension of rules.
Second.
Second by Ms. Davis. Can I have roll call vote, please? On the suspension. I'm sorry.
On the suspension, Mr. Callahan?
Aye.
Mr. Cira?
Aye.
Mr. Armstrong?
Aye.
Mr. Oswald?
Aye.
Mrs. Mitchell?
Aye.
Mr. Tolet?
Aye.
Mr. Lippian?
Aye.
Mrs. Sawerka?
Aye.
Mrs. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Schneider?
Aye.
Mr. Stewart?
Aye.
All ayes. On the passage, Mr. Callahan?
Aye.
Mr. Cira?
Aye.
Mr. Armstrong?
Aye.
Mr. Oswald?
Aye.
Mrs. Mitchell?
Aye.
Mr. Tolet?
Aye.
Mr. Lippian?
Aye.
Mrs. Sawerka?
Aye.
Mrs. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Schneider?
Aye.
Mr. Stewart?
Aye.
All ayes. Ordinance 2024-186. Sponsored by Finance, an ordinance authorizing the Finance Director to create a new capital project fund.
Mr. Tolet?
Mr. President, I ask that this ordinance be passed in its first reading under suspension of rules.
Second.
Second by Mr. Schneider. Is there any further discussion?
Question.
On the suspension, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. On the passage, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried.
It's 2024-187. Sponsored by Finance, an ordinance amending ordinance number 2024-46, known as the 2024 Permanent Appropriations Ordinance, to change funds in various accounts.
Mr. Tolet?
Mr. President, I ask that this ordinance be passed in its first reading under suspension of rules.
Second.
Second by Mr. Lippian. Is there any further discussion?
Question.
On the suspension, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. On the passage, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried.
Ordinance 2024-188. That's all ordinances first reading.
Ordinances, second reading.
There are none?
Ordinances, third reading.
There are none.
Committee calls.
Finance requests the presence of the mayor, law director, finance director, and safety service director and engineer on Monday, 12/9/2024, beginning at 6 p.m. Utilities, there's nothing for utilities, and strategic planning requests the mayor, safety service director, and finance director, and law director on Monday, 12/16, immediately following council meeting.
There's a joint utilities.
And there's,
Utilities and finance and joint.
okay. So utilities and finance will meet jointly after the finance meeting on the 12th? On 12/9, excuse me. I think we got it. You guys got that?
Yeah, generally, the utilities would meet on the 4th, but there's no items referred other than
There's no
going to joint
referrals.
for the 9th, yep. Miscellaneous and unfinished business? Mr. Schneider.
Through you, Mr. President, I'd just like to take a moment and thank Mr. Callahan for his many years of service as a Community Development Chair, and thank you all for your consideration, Council, for the nomination for the chair position, and thank you all for what you do every day for the city of Elyria. And I'm looking forward to working with department leadership and all of you on the Community Development Committee as the chair. Thank you.
And I would like to also thank Mr. Callahan. We had a nice conversation at the Rules Committee when, this was discussed, and recommendation for Mr. Schneider. And, Mr. Callahan and I came in at the same time, and he's done a tremendous job as the Community Development Chair. And those are challenging meetings that come before the committee all the time, and he handled it extraordinarily well. And, but he's not going away. He's going to be still remain on the committee in itself. And then, congratulations to Mr. Schneider. He'll do a tremendous job. He's very involved, not only as a council at large, but he served on Planning Commission for a number of years. And so I think he'll, fit that role perfectly. So congratulations to you, Mr. Schneider.
Thank you.
Mr. Brubaker, Mayor Brubaker.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize, I forgot, I lost track of the date, but Saturday, December 7th, this coming Saturday, is the Festival of Lights in the Square. We'll be welcoming Santa Claus around 6 o'clock between Fire Department and myself, and you'll notice that the Parks and Rec Department did a phenomenal job of decorating the square, and you'll see a new fella down there on top of the fountain, the Abominable Snowman. That was a Jay Horwittle project. So he is overwatching our square, but I look forward to seeing everybody on Saturday evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Tolet?
One thing real quick, and it was brought up by Chief Pernesti, the issue of minimum staffing with the fire department. I don't want that to slide under. It's a huge deal for the finances for the city, and Chief Pernesti said he was going to do it, and he did it, and it means a lot that he and his leadership team at the fire department can do this. So I don't want it to go unnoticed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tolet. Any other further business? If not, Ms. Mitchell?
Mr. President, seeing none, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Meeting adjourned.